here. Okay, so next, what were the results of the UP? Okay, so we're going to talk about the breakdown of the recommendations for the Algerian UPR in November, which took place in November 11th, 2022. It was Friday, and basically where this information came from is you're not going to see this really anywhere else. You would have to take the breakdown of the draft report and sit down, read it, and really decipher each by each where the recommendations lie. So the way it was analyzed, and you can analyze this multiple number of ways. In fact, as far as statistics, you will see statistics coming out during the adaptation, which is on the 24th of this month. And you generally see that the UN, what they do is they have, for example, like 4 or 5 brackets and like 4 pies that are very general. And they tell you, oh, 50% were this, 20% were that, 40% is this. And so it's really how you break it down. What they do is they break it into very general brackets, so it's easier for them to do. We're not concerned about general categorization. What we are concerned about is really precise detail to really analyze the outcome of the working group, the 122 nations that gave recommendations to Algeria. We want to see if that was representative, the international effort was representative of Algeria, as this will affect Algerians more than anyone. So what I did, and you can clearly see it on here, is there are very precise details. So again, I didn't put these into general large brackets. The only generalizations really that occurred is when they say civil society protection, or when they say judicial system development, independence, and also institutional development and alignment. And the reason for that is, please understand this, is that the recommendations skew in a number of ways. Not all recommendations that talk about freedom of expression are necessarily aligned with Hirak or even take a position. For example, one can say, continue to work on. That skews very differently than one that says, stop without delay, or one that says, strengthen, or one that says, develop. They all skew different ways. The mere mention of freedom of expression is not necessarily good or bad. For example, when they're saying continue to do the great job that you do, well, that's not necessarily one that advocates will align with. So keep in mind, it is not the mere mention, but it is how the recommendation, really the strength of it, is it really aimed at a solution? Is it being used as a politicized method, which a lot of them do? So we have to keep multiple things in mind. When I am reminded of the freedom of expression, I'm actually reminded of the Shadley joke. I'll show you the Shadley joke where he goes to the UK and he says, "Oh wow, the kids are so smart there. Even the babies speak English." And it's like, duh. You're in England. Every kid's gonna speak English. That's their official language. Well, it's the same concept with freedom of expression. It's not really impressive, or kind of doesn't mean much that freedom of expression was mentioned. It's how was it mentioned? Because again, this is a human rights mechanism. For every country they will talk about, you will have some recommendations for freedom of expression. So keeping that in mind, I did, again, put them very detailed. So when I saw a particular topic that I know is of high interest based on research and surveys, like for example, Article 87 BIST, I took that out to see how much out of the 291 recommendations, how many were mentioned Article 87. And unfortunately, there's only 5 out of 291. Out of the 291, there was a mistake in the draft report. Spain, one of its recommendations was mentioned actually twice. It was on gender equality, but that was corrected. And so the second topic here you have, of course, is children, very general topic. You have civil society protection, capacity building. Again, this is another one of those topics where it's not necessarily skewed one way or the other. They can say continue to build on human rights education, for example. That was actually mentioned several times, which is again saying that education, human rights education is the issue, skews differently than what advocates are saying, which are saying, that the institutions are possibly an issue. So again, it doesn't really stand in any shape, way, or form. For freedom of the detainees, for example, in civil society, there only were 5 mentions, unfortunately. Less mentions than, of course, freedom of religion, which was mentioned 14 times. Did get significant representation. Freedom of expression had 24, but again, it skews in any way. We not necessarily mean that it skews in the direction of hierarchy. By far the largest and most covered topic was gender equality and of course, women empowerment and improvement. Now, again, it's not that this is not an important topic for Algerians, it is. However, keep in mind that this is a top priority for the UN and international community. So this, you can clearly see the international agenda really right here with women's development. And of course, you have multiple things. Some stuff that's very interesting that pointed out to me was pre-trial detention. Again, 3 mentions. That's less. That's about 0.6%. Okay, less coverage than, for example, LGBTQ and same-sex marriage, which had, I believe, 6, so double the rate. And again, we've had some media, for example, only got 10 mentions. You have the death penalty, very interestingly, had 10 mentions. The death penalty has not been used since 1990s. Keep in mind, this mechanism is aimed to be 5 years. So it's really supposed to cover a span of 5 years. Yet, for example, they had disappearances and largely mentioned the Civil War, which again, that's in the 90s. And really, we should be focused on the now. So largely, unfortunately, the results from the working group was not very representative of Algerian civil society. That is my inference that I'm making from this, and I will show you later on based on statistics that were made. So once again, we are here, and this is a different diagram. This is more of a pie, so to set up a little bit of percentages. Again, keep in mind, these are topics and categories. This can be done in a number of ways. For example, gender equality could have been broken down a little bit differently. Different topics could have been included in other ones. So you might see, again, another analysis that is slightly different as far as numbers are skewed, and you might also see something probably a lot more condensed when it comes to the UPR. But for our purposes, we are not concerned about general topics as the UN, as the general topics they are doing for their own statistics. We want actual statistics that they cover what Algerians are interested in. And so we did it in a pie to really render the percentage. So if this was the entire, of course, recommendations, 291, what does the portion of it represent what Algerians wanted? And again, I have it here in a pie, for example, the freedom of detainees and arbitrary detention. So unfortunately, so we didn't even need to break down both. So unfortunately, if we were to say just the detainees, specifically mentioning them, it would be a lot smaller. But you did have certain recommendation, like the US recommendation 6.8, that actually mentioned it specifically. So we do have the roadmap. So right here, as you can see, really, really narrow portion. That's a very, very small representation. And this is why I make the inference that the working group was not very representative. It seemed that, again, inferencing based on the results, that they had more of their external agenda that they prioritized over Algerian wants and needs. And keep in mind, particularly when we do have representation, when civil society, when advocates, when anyone is representing people, then you have the moral ethics to represent what they want, not what we want. So, for example, gender equality is a very near and dear topic to my heart, but it's not the topic I'm focusing on. But I know, because I know it is not representative of 99% of Algerians, but it is definitely representative of 50% of Algerians. So again, personal choice and what ethics are 2 different things. So granted, as far as speaking to people on the ground, and what do Algerians want as far as former detainees, Harakis activists, human rights defenders, civil society. It is definitely by far from the sample surveys that freedom and arbitrary detention of detainees is the #1 concern, and also pretrial detention, the overuse of pretrial detention, which was again mentioned 0.6% of the time. Granted, all of these rights are important. Everybody's rights in Algeria are important. All Algerians matter. But there is a reality between, you cannot ignore what 99% of people are saying and over prioritize what 1% or less than 1% are saying. So again, this unfortunately really shows that there were very poorly representative of Algerian concerns, wants, and needs. Another aspect that I again want to emphasize is not all recommendations, because they heed to a particular topic, it does not necessarily mean that they skew in the way that, for example, Harakis or protesters or in any way. So I did take on a little bit more of information that I do want to read. For example, the nature and strength of recommendations vary. For instance, the word continue or continue to was mentioned 78 times, ensure 41 times, eliminate 7 times, review 5 times, amend 11 times, consider 15 times, address 8 times, put an end to 2 times, and of course, that's just to name a few. By far, there were 291 recommendation. But you can clearly see how it's very different to say continue to, also to say consider this versus put an end to. Again, all of those categories were placed, for example, in freedom of expression. So that is why we cannot really come out and say, hey, the UPR had good results, or hey, the UPR had bad results, especially not momentarily after or during the UPR. We really have to sit down and analyze to see the real results. So when discussing the UPR results and when making an inference such as I have, where we are saying basically that it is not representative of Algerian civil society, we can of course use the qualitative surveying method where we speak to individuals and write them down, or in general. But what I wanted to do is to have an actual survey. So it is of course a difficult population to recruit because of course tightened enforcement and escalated tactics. So the way we did the survey is of course both online and as well as through on the ground people collecting information. So we used basically what we call a snowball methodology effect for sampling, which is a system really used for hard to recruit groups. So what we did is we used basically within our sample is Algerian activists, Algerian Harakists, and former detainees, civil societies on the ground in Algeria. And so the survey included really 3 questions. The first was a pick all that apply, so multiple check boxes. The second was a multiple choice, which is you picked only one. And third was an open-ended question, in which case if there was a topic that we missed, what could be filled in there. So the first question basically says which topics matter to Algerians. And again, you could have picked all the topics, to include, of course, no concern, in case there were individuals of no concern. By far, the highest topic, where 89.6% of the sample chose, is the release of prisoners of conscience, or detainees. The second largest topic is 87, very close, was freedom of expression. Third was freedom of association and assembly, and this is consistent with previous surveys that we took even prior in August. The fourth, which is corruption, okay, does have high level of education. Gender equality was really 7th place. And of course, then you had the death penalty, which again was mentioned here because they could pick anyone they want, but it's very different results. For example, when we go to the next slide, which says which one is top priority, so it's multiple choice, you can pick only one out of all of these. And again, Algerian wants and needs, especially for sample, was very clear, and it was the release of the detainees, followed once more by freedom of expression, third by association, assembly, and fourth, corruption. So you can quite see it's very, very consistent in what they want, and very indicative of the consistency that their demands have. However, when we take a look at, of course, what we did before, which was the UPR recommendation, clearly the two are not mirrored nor aligned.